Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a filmmaker who has written, produced, directed, and starred in a refreshingly innovative documentary film entitled A Sexplanation. At the age of 36, he decided to go on a quest to explore the hard truths behind America's inadequate and antiquated approach to sex education, which leaves us uninformed and which can often lead to emotional distress and even feelings of shame. This fascinating, insightful, and humorous film takes us on a unique journey and features provocative conversations with psychologists, sex researchers, educators, and yes, even a priest. This film is not only about one man's evolution from a shame-filled past to a happier, healthier, and sexier future, it's ultimately about the universal search for love, connection, and family acceptance. To whet your appetite, here's the trailer. Watch this.
How do you define an orgasm?
Define that for me, sexual being. How do you define sex?
Hi, I'm Alex. America raised me to be ignorant about sex.
The vulva? I think that's what that is.
It's not the vulva.
Vagina majoris? The vagina minoris?
Not quite.
No?
Did you ever think you had to have a sex talk with the kids?
I always thought Dad should do it.
We don't wait for people to say, I'm ready for algebra. We introduce that when they're developmentally ready to take on algebra. Ovaries.
The cervix.
Called an erection.
Clitoris.
But in America, comprehensive sex ed still meets a lot of resistance.
They should stay out of sex. That belongs to the family.
But if you, your parents, and their parents never learned to talk about sex, how do you learn to talk about sex? So, at 36 years old, I'm finally gonna confront my fears head on.
For the prostate stimulation, put it in deeper.
You're probably wondering why I came to you.
Yes, I was wondering, Alex.
I do have a lot of sexual thoughts that I'm like, that doesn't seem right.
I think it's time to start asking some questions. For starters, what the America?
There's probably going to be poop.
This terrific movie has won 9 film festival awards, and it's now available for viewing on all major digital platforms. Our guest is a journalist focusing on health. He's produced video, radio, and print content for numerous media outlets, and he's developed 2 YouTube channels focused on sex and drug education, totaling over 5 million views. I'm delighted to welcome Alex Liu to our show. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor.
Alex, you have quite the academic background. You studied molecular toxicology at the University of California at Berkeley, and then you studied science, health, and environmental reporting at New York University. What made you want to become a health reporter?
Yeah, so I think I've always had a passion for the biological sciences. I think biology was the first way that I kind of framework to see in which to see the world, in which my life made sense, to see myself as a queer man as perfectly within the normal distribution of human biological diversity. You know, it was the first time that clicked to me that the messages I was getting, maybe from the media, from politics, from religion, didn't really comport with the lived reality of billions of human beings. So science, especially biology, especially health, was a place I gravitated towards, and then communicating about those things became a passion of mine. Because when you really look into the research that's been around for decades, you realize how much pain and suffering and shame could be spared if people just really knew some very, very basic facts.
Well, in 2011, you were a contributing writer on a TV series called Nova Science Now, and you were also involved in another TV series called Jaded. But it's quite a big jump from that to producing and directing a feature film. And your very first movie is a huge success. Congratulations, Alex.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to process. It's very surreal.
Tell us what inspired you to make this movie.
I think it's just been the getting into my 30s, thinking that I had reached a point of sex positivity, let's say, of acceptance. I've been out of the closet for almost 20 years. But I think I felt very angry, and I had a lot of anger at the world still that I thought would dissipate by that time. And ultimately what I realized in doing this movie is that anger was really much more of a defense mechanism to really hide myself from the world, because I still had a great deal of shame I wasn't dealing with when it came to sex and sexuality. And, it's one thing to say that you're a gay man, but it's another thing to be completely open, vulnerable with another human being, regardless of background, and actually express yourself in an authentic way. It's such a difficult task, and we're not really given the training to do that. You can intellectually understand that sex is not shameful, but when you get or in the bedroom and in the heat of a moment, a lot of emotions and shame does bubble up, and I didn't know how to process it. I think I turned to a lot of different things that probably were unhealthy, which is having lots of sex, having drink, drug, all these different things. And I just got to the point where I was exhausted, and I thought there needed to be a different way. And maybe if I could bring a film crew with me, I could be open and honest and vulnerable in a weird way, than in ways I hadn't been before, because it was under this framework, this lens of work or of art, and that was kind of how the movie came to be.
Well, now here we are in 2022, where people, even kids, can get information about pretty much everything online. And yet there's still widespread resistance to comprehensive sex education in the schools. Why do you think that is, Alex?
Oh, it's very clear to me that it's this millennia plus generational shame that's been passed on, over and over and over again. And I think, when you think about it, the last 100 years in terms of the sexual revolution, the technologies available, contraception, the internet, all these different things that have exploded in the last 100 years, our sexual values have changed faster probably than they ever have in human history. So I think there's a lot of catch up to do. And I think a lot of people, I used to have a lot of anger towards my parents in terms of how they reacted to my coming out. But when you think about their background, where no one even talked to them about, menstruation, and then my grandmother's background where it was even worse, that I think I do have a lot of empathy for parents who are scared, unsure about what's being taught in classrooms, because they themselves probably are also in deep need of a sex education. So I think, I'm not excusing the resistance to sex education, but I think it's understandable. And I think if we have any hope of getting good sex education in classes, we have to target our messaging towards parents and help assuage a lot of parents' fears, which for rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of.
Well, I'm 65 years old, and I don't recall getting any sex education at school when I was a kid. And if we did, it would have been about disease, pregnancy,
Right.
and abstinence. What do you think the schools should be teaching kids about sex?
So I think it's so difficult to give a one size fits all prescription in terms of sex ed. I think it's basically impossible to divorce cultural values from a sex education. It's just sexuality is so inherent to who we are and how who we are in a culture and in a society. But I think the main kind of framework that I think we need to shift away from, like you said, we don't really get sex education. We get disease education, we get pregnancy education, maybe we get puberty education, but it's all framed under this public health kind of policy of trying to prevent risk, prevent the worst parts of sex. So when we teach sex, for the first time kids are hearing about it, it's framed as a negative, right? It's framed as sex is this incredible risk, incredible danger. Not to say that it's wrong, but it's just such a small fraction of what sex is, right? For the most part, for most people, most of their sexual encounters are the best part of their day, week, month, year. The sexual relationships you form in your life are the ones you'll carry to you on your deathbed. They're the most meaningful, most powerful, most beautiful parts of what it means to be a human. And so I think, however a culture, society, school board, school decides to teach about sex, I think they need to focus first and foremost on, we want to make sure that sex goes well for you. Sex is beautiful and amazing and should be honored and respected rather than feared. And I think if you can just make that kind of basic framework shift, that could dissipate a lot of the problems we have later in life when kids aren't prepared for sex and aren't prepared to advocate for their needs, their desires, what they want, because they've been scared to talk about these things, that they've been terrified. And so avoiding that kind of trauma, I think, is a one big paradigm shift that I think hopefully most of us can agree with.
You said in the movie that the whole concept of abstinence, that abstaining from sex until you're married makes you a good person, that this mentality forces young people to suppress their sexuality, which is not healthy. What did you learn about when it's okay for young people to start having sexual experiences?
I think that's always the question, right? Because I think, as we try to explain in the movie, that again, there's not really a one size fits all. People are so individual. We really should think about sexuality as like 8 billion distinct sexualities. We're all so different. Some of us are asexual, have no interest at all in intercourse. Some of us are highly sexual, in which we find tons of meaning through sexual experiences. It's so diverse and varied. I think the key, though, is we want to make sure when kids feel like they're ready, that they're actually ready. Because there's a difference between feeling like you're ready and being actually prepared. And I think a lot of that has to do with consent. I think you can hear over and over again, you need consent, but in the heat of a moment, there are a million emotions going on, from fear to pleasure, a lot of things. And it sometimes can be difficult to really be able to communicate what you're actually feeling and what your needs or desires and your boundaries. So I think, I just think the lessons might be different depending on the age, but I think from as early as possible, you need to be helping kids understand, say, the difference between good touch, bad touch, the difference between privacy and public, the difference between, saying how you feel, I think, kids from a very young age understand that there are such things as pleasurable physical interactions, right? We all love to be cuddled by our parents. We all love, to hug, that sort of thing. And then those aren't intercourse, but there is a sexual component to that. So I think it's important that we really understand that sex is not, the actual intercourse is just one part of sex, but the spectrum of sexuality, if you think about sex much more broadly in terms of pleasurable human connections of all kind, the earliest we can get kids to understand how to advocate for themselves, how to be in communication with people, and then just how to learn how to speak openly, honestly to the people in their lives who they trust. I think the saddest part I think a lot about is, your people's parents really are the best people, as long as you're in a happy, healthy family, are the best people to help their kids through understand sex and sexuality, because they know their kids the best. But oftentimes, because there's just been kind of like this silence established from a very early age, kids don't get their questions answered until it's much too late. I think also a lot about how a lot of kids, and myself included, I was more comfortable having sex than talking about sex, and that it really should be the other way around. So I think, this, I'm kind of not really answering the question so much, but the important thing is, I think that we have to be preparing our kids to talk about sex, to talk about what they feel, to talk about if they're ready, to talk about if they're not ready. And the more fluent you get in communication, and then the more prepared that child will be whenever they decide that they are ready for a sexual intercourse.
Have you received any feedback about the movie from school teachers or people who are responsible for school curriculums?
Yeah, I think a lot of people responsible for curricula, especially high schools, college, that they've reached out and seeing if they can show the film. I think, I understand for under 18-year-olds, it's going to be difficult. And it's not even that difficult because we're talking about, say, like masturbation or homosexuality. It's difficult because we simply have depictions of the naked, of the nude human form, not during intercourse, not arousal, just a very plain kind of depiction of body types of all kind. And that, unfortunately, for, especially in America, the naked body is still seen as very taboo. And that's been a really difficult thing to get through when it comes to younger kids. Yeah.
You've said that because you were never properly educated about sex, you were disconnected from your body and your desires, and you were filled with shame, which is really a form of self-loathing. From your research, Alex, is that sense of shame unique to gay people, or is it commonly felt by straight people as well?
Oh, I would have said at the beginning of this movie that it's kind of in the purview of queer people, but I think we all have a sense of that. I think, a great way to think about it is, often when you think about the first time you had an orgasm, was that a moment of like celebration and joy, or is that a moment of fear and confusion? And I think for most people, it was fear and confusion. For most people, kids, the idea of watching pornography or being turned on was something that they feared, regardless of the background. And I think, yes, queer, trans, gay people, I think, feel it more acutely because, frankly, society is telling them over and over and over again that they are other. And that's just like the definition of shame. But I think, think about straight guys, who, don't hug their friends because they think it makes them gay. I think about, straight women who maybe feel like they have to have kids. There's a lot of things that I think straight people also have to deal with that they feel they need to conform to, even though that they themselves don't necessarily feel that's an innate desire of their own.
Now, you also said that your lack of a proper sex education made you feel disconnected from your family. Was that because you had a hard time coming out to your parents?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the gay thing for sure. When luckily they had no issue with it. When I came out of the closet, they put me into therapy. They went out to meet local gay people. We were set on the right path. They had a near perfect reaction. But when you don't talk about it, and you don't, and all the messages you hear from the world are negative, it feels safer at the time just to keep it a secret and to disconnect. It just feels so much safer. Thankfully now, I think that's a problem that's changing very quickly, just frankly because of all the messages we have. I mean, the president of the United States is talking about trans rights. I think it's very, very different now for kids. But I still think that often a big reason why there is a disconnect, and especially after puberty, between parents and kids, is because they've never established early on that this is a topic that they can discuss freely. Parents maybe still get weird and silent and awkward around conversations around sex. And I think that disconnection happens. It can happen very early too. I think, one of the things I realized during the movie, so many of our experts told, just parents don't even name the genitals, right? They'll just talk about eyes, ears, nose, elbow, and then they'll skip a whole part of a person's body. And kids pick up very quickly, like, oh, this part of my body is bad. My parents don't want to talk about it. My parents don't approve of this part of my body. And I think, the disconnection happens much earlier than I ever, you ever realize. And I think, I think rightfully so, parents should have a lot of concern about how sex will go for their kids, because there is a lot of pain and that can kind of come from sex. But the solution to that is not keeping sex information away from them. The solution to that is making sure early and often and over and over and over again, in 30-second, 45-second, 1-minute conversations, you show your kid over and over again that sex is just a normal part of life. It's beautiful. It happens. It's nothing, inherently wrong about sex. And I think if you can do that, your kids will be much more likely to come to you with these questions. And some of the conversations you have around with your kid, helping them deal with the real, difficult, kind of emotional baggage that comes with sex, can be some of the most fulfilling, connected conversations you ever have. So I think sex, sadly, to me, is one of those places where kids and parents disconnect, and it really doesn't have to be that way.
I have to say, Alex, it really surprised and saddened me that some young people today still have a difficult time dealing with their sexuality and coming out. I came out in 1975 when I was 19. I thought that my generation fought the battles and made all the necessary strides so that your generation would not have to go through the distress that some people are still experiencing. Why do you think it's still so hard for so many gay people to come out?
Well, first of all, I have to say, that's amazing. You came out in 1975 at 19. I think I wouldn't discount how big of an effect that probably did have on people in your world, in your life. And I know I couldn't have come out without, people generations before me coming out soon, But I think, especially during the HIV/AIDS crisis, I think there was such an overwhelming fear of gay people, of queer people. And I think it's such an gay people, because of our numbers, are such an easy target to for the most cynical political power grabs. I think because it's changing very fast now. I think you can't be overtly homophobic like you could in 2004, even, 2010, even in the United States. I think simply because of our numbers and simply because of the deep sexual shame that's rooted in Judeo-Christian values from 5,000 years ago, it's still very difficult to get people to understand. And that was a big part of why I wanted to make the movie, to show that, yes, we might seem different to you on the outset, but the issues we're dealing with as queer people maybe are feel bigger or are bigger or take up more of our lives, but it's all part of a continuum that even straight people deal with. That the sexual shame that gay people have to go through also affects, the straightest straight white man in the world, and that isn't it better that supporting sexual diversity and queer people not only helps us, but it helps you too. We all benefit if we live in a world in which we see sex as something that is our right, something that we can experience and express with whomever and however consensually, and isn't the world a happier, healthier, sexier place? And isn't that something worth fighting for, regardless of your background?
I was really impressed that your parents and your grandmother appeared in the movie. How did you manage to convince them to do that?
I think, they've just seen the path I've been on, I think, this has been now an almost 20-year journey for us since I've come out. And while they didn't maybe understand at the beginning, that they understand deeply that in order for me to find any meaning, any kind of happiness, a way to process the trauma we went through as a family, because it was very difficult at the beginning, that if this could in any way help another family to avoid what we all had to go through, it was worth, having to be open, vulnerable on camera. I think it's just, I feel so lucky, and I'm privileged and such an honor that my parents, without knowing how they would be viewed, without knowing how I would use the footage, me not even knowing what we were doing when we started, that they were willing to just be so open and honest and vulnerable on camera, because those are the scenes that people respond to the most. Those are the scenes that I think illustrate kind of the true kind of transcendent connections you can have when you are completely yourself with the people you love. And I think that's just something I continue to fight for in our relationship, and hopefully help others do, because life is short and often full of suffering. So why not try to find as much meaning and beauty as you can with those that love you the most.
So what did your family think of the movie?
They're the only people I said, if you want anything to take out of the movie, don't even question it. Whatever you want, I'll take out. And they told me to leave every frame in, which I just was so beautiful, I think.
Wow.
They I think my dad will always hope that I one day become an engineer or go back to be a biotech, go back to biotech. But I think now he sees that it's not only rare to see kind of a family have conversations about sex on screen like this so openly. It's rare to see a gay Asian immigrant family talk about these things. So I think, they understand now, and after seeing the film and seeing the journey I went on, I think we just understand each other's that much more, and they see it as now just this wonderful part of of our story, and in terms of how we made the best use of the time we had here on Earth.
Now, almost everyone I know never had the talk with their parents. I can tell you that my parents never spoke to me about sex. Everyone I know found out about sex from a schoolmate, or maybe from something they saw in a magazine or on TV or online. Mm-hmm. If a parent is uncomfortable having that conversation with their child, or simply doesn't know what to say, where can they turn to for help?
Yeah, luckily now, like we showed in the film, I think that was a big turning point for me, and having a lot of empathy for parents who maybe set the stage for sexual shame, but it's just because that's just the culture we grew up in. That's how our world is structured and designed. There are, go online, search for sex ed classes that parents and children can take. Since the pandemic, there are a lot of virtual classes you both can take together. And that's so great to have a medical professional break the ice and help you have these conversations. Find the help you need, because, to just do it on your own, it's not necessarily realistic if you yourself are uncomfortable with it. And I think, the other thing is, I think we do frame this as the talk. Like, you have to have this excruciatingly awkward 1 hour conversation with your kid once in life and you're done. But I think that's not the right way to go about it, because why have a conversation when both parties are just begging for it to be over. That's not very helpful either. Just it kind of just reinforces the shame and discomfort I think we feel. And so I think, it's we can have, you can have so I always kind of advise the tiniest, smallest baby step you can think of, right? So like I think about when the first time I said I'm gay, I wanted to puke. I couldn't deal with it. But now, in 20 years later, it just rolls off the top of my tongue, But it took, tens of thousands of little baby steps for me to get comfortable with it. But you can do it, but it just takes time, effort, and concerted effort. So, have that 30-second conversation with your kid about this is your penis, this is your vulva, this is your clitoris. End of conversation, move on to the next, have that conversation of, oh yes, we as parents really enjoy sex. It brings us closer together. It's a fun, playful thing we do to reinforce our love for each other. Move on to the next. I think it's just about just not making it normal, but not making this big kind of event around having to talk about sex. It's just like what kind of ice cream you want to eat today. It's just like what's going on with other family members. It's a normal part of the human existence. And if you treat it like that, then your kids will feel safe to then talk about it too with you. Kids are different. It's all different. It's hard to know exactly if all families are individual and specific, and I don't want to give too much prescription. But I think it is in those tiny little moments of baby steps, every little brick you lay, every day, every week, soon you build this entire house in which you're all able to have the conversations you need to have.
Alex, you got a lot of highly qualified experts to appear in the film, but how in the world did you manage to convince a Jesuit priest to be interviewed on camera?
Father Godfrey, he, without giving too much of his background, he's not under the direct authority of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, right? So he has a little bit of political freedom where he is. I think also his experience being in San Francisco in the 80s and 90s during the HIV/AIDS crisis, I think was transformative for him in terms of he went to be a priest, to be of service to people. And when he saw how the Catholic Church treated the men who had sex with men in just such cruel, callous ways, who are going through the worst epidemic of our lifetimes, I think changed him. And he realized that the Catholic Church fails the world if they don't engage in issues of sex and sexuality in a way that is meaningful towards the people, and that sex is not something to be feared. It is something to be honored. And I think, it took a little while to find him. He's not necessarily someone the Catholic Church, pushes out to talk about these things. But I think, he's someone who is an outlier, but willing to talk about these things in a way that I just commend him for his bravery to do that, because it does fly in the face of kind of most Catholic teachings, and someone who, and he's just someone who really believes deep down that if you do want to live up to the values of the Catholic Church, meeting people where they are in a non-judgmental way around the erotic, around sexuality, is the only way the Catholic Church has a future.
Well, I was really, really impressed with him, and it really elevates your movie into something monumental, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you.
Was there anything about the movie that surprised you?
There's a lot that surprised me. I think the main thing that not only the conversation I had with my parents, if you told me at the beginning of making this film that I would talk about my parents' sex life, my masturbation habits with them, all these things, you would, I wouldn't have believed you. That was a big surprise. But I think the biggest surprise I've had throughout this whole process is definitely kind of what we've touched on before, that people of all backgrounds can relate to this in a way I didn't anticipate. I was so terrified to put so much of my own life in this. Just to say that you're gay, I thought, that will just turn off 90% of the viewing population, and maybe it does. But the responses I've had with, straight men to religious couples, all these different people who who maybe weren't sure what they're getting into when they saw the movie, but have now come to me and said, I was pausing the movie every 5 minutes to talk about things I've never talked about with my partner for 30 years. Getting people to have these intense, meaningful conversations with the people in their lives that they've never had before. It just blows me away that we all can that we all have been, I think, waiting to get permission to do that. That we often these things have been something we keep within ourselves for so long. And I thought maybe it was just mainly gay people, but to see that the response of all backgrounds, that's just been such an amazing, pleasant surprise of this whole process. Yeah.
Do you think that making the movie was therapeutic for you?
Oh yes, no question. It was something. Again, it's shame can't live in the light. So when you only see probably 12 experts in the film, but we interviewed I think close to 40. And when and it's just like coming out of the closet, when you divulge your porn search history, your masturbation habits, your fantasies, your fears, your desires to 30 different people, and they all kind of tell you the same thing, and you start to realize that actually, the only thing that's normal about being a human being is that we're all different sexually. Like the idea of normal is kind of meaningless in many ways, and only that we all have something that's atypical. And so I think it's important. It's been so great to just talk to people like you, so many people about these things. It really feels like shame doesn't control my life in a way it did before, and in a way I felt powerless before making the movie. I wouldn't say I feel powerful, but I feel like I have a power that I didn't have today.
Yeah, I think you have a freedom that you didn't have before.
For sure.
Now, I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, so I apologize in advance, but
No worries.
Cannot resist asking you, what was it like doing what you did on camera in an MRI machine?
Masturbating in an MRI machine. It was awful. It was awful. It's just the pressure. Sex is never great under pressure. Having to perform and having so many people, so many eyes on you, and you're in a very cramped, crowded space. It's cold. It's not very erotic in any way. But I think that was a very big moment for the film because I did fall into kind of a shame hole for the next week. Where I was like, what did I do? This is crazy. What are people gonna think? What are my parents gonna think? But it really started a whole process of the film and understanding me really thinking and processing like, what is actually so inherently shameful about masturbating, right? What is so inherently shameful about masturbating for science? I think it made me really realize that my shame, my sexual shame, was not just gay or queer like I kind of thought. It went down to the very kind of fundamental aspects about being a sexual being, that somehow self-pleasure is somehow shameful. And I think it's been a great process for me. I don't necessarily recommend everyone do it, but if you feel like you want to contribute to science in any way, I think it is a very liberating experience if you have the right tools at your disposal and right people to help you kind of think it through. Because it's crazy to me how one of the most universal sexual acts in humanity is kind of the one we speak the least about.
Well, I have the tool at my disposal. I just don't think I could get it to work.
Well, it's something where you got to prepare. I basically didn't jerk off for like a week before. You got to dig deep into your deepest fantasies. But it's again, it's not for everyone, but yeah, we got there in the end.
Now you have a production company, Hera Productions, and you've also produced a very popular web video series on YouTube called Science of Sin, which provides a lot of really good information about sexuality, relationships, drugs, and so much more. What inspired you to create that series?
Yeah, I think, and there's a lot of things, I think, as a health reporter, a lot of the stories that I was getting on air, for good reason, had to do much more with like policy, politics, kind of the political battle of the day. But a lot of the stories I was most interested in were kind of dispelling the myths and lies that we all get that are never really corrected when it comes to some of our biggest pleasures, right? And I think, you know, the just say no abstinence model that we're often taught, just, you know, I think the evidence is clear that it doesn't work, that ultimately the best way to mitigate risk, because there are risks, you know, I don't want to sugarcoat things. There are risks to many of the pleasures we have in our life, but the best way to actually mitigate those risks is to give people the honest truth so that they can take that information and apply it to their own lives as best as possible. It doesn't mean that you're going to solve a problem. You know, I think they're just inherent to being a human being. But I didn't see anyone putting this information out there in a way that I think younger people especially could process, you know. So we try to make it as entertaining, engaging, funny, kind of sketch comedy as possible, because we wanted to make sure this information is getting out there in a way that was fun and freeing and shame-free. And so that's kind of the idea behind the YouTube channel.
So now that your first full-length feature film has been such a big success, are there any plans to make another one?
There are plans. What it'll be about, we'll see. I mean, the movie business, the entertainment business is you know, it could be on a lot of things. But yeah, I am very interested in, you know, the conversations with like the priest and especially conservative politicians and protesters in the film about very difficult taboo things are kind of the conversations that have stuck with me the most. And I'm very interested to see, you know, what are the ways that we can actually talk about these things in a way that feels productive. Because I think when you look at the world now, sex is just one area in which there's a huge divide. There's so many horrible political, tribal divides that we have in the world, and it seemed to be getting worse. And just like with the Sexplanation, the goal was to get people to be more open and honest and have difficult conversations about sex. Can we do the same thing when it comes to all the other parts of the world that seem incompatible, from religion to politics, that sort of thing? But there's also so many interviews we did in the film, queer researchers, kink researchers, historians, and it didn't get in because for time reasons. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about and try to make. Yeah, I think hopefully that'll happen in the next couple of years.
Well, I think you're really onto something. It's been such a pleasure having you on our show. I absolutely loved your movie. And I really hope everyone watching this interview will go to their favorite streaming platform and watch it, A Sexplanation. I promise it's a really thought-provoking and entertaining experience that you will not soon forget. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest has been Alex Liu, writer, producer, director, and star of the new documentary film, A Sexplanation, which is now available for viewing on all major digital streaming platforms. For more information about the film, visit Alex's website, heraproductions.com. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.